Welcome to the module on Mutual Interdependence between State and Economy, Modern Views. The concept of mutual interdependence is deeply rooted in the exchange between the nations when they participate with the globe or get integrated to the rest of the world. This calls for the introductory section on economic interdependence. This mutual interdependence can be measured in terms of the value of the transactions which are being traded between the two nations or between the country and to the rest of the globe. This is basically measured in terms of total financial assets, and thereby the economic interdependence becomes more and more pronounced. This is basically a systematic flow because it is based on a series of institutions and the policy making which are involved, where the countries depend on each other in terms of the items or the goods they are receiving, and also they are basically exchanging for them. This also makes the manufacturing sector and all the other sectors to go in an efficient manner, and thereby comes the role of state and the market orientation. Global economic interdependence have expanded since the Second World War with the advent of technology. Because with the advent of technological revolution across the globe, economic interconnectedness or economic dependence has become more and more pronounced. And this calls for many items where the specialization, where the division of labor and also the skill formation takes place. This also opens up the scope of global competition both internally and internationally. So thereby the mutual interdependence is measured in terms of interdependence across the nations, which is solely economic in nature and also comprising its interconnectedness with the other features of this globalization. Economic interdependence also can be measured in terms of specialization of the items that are being done. So when we are referring to the word of the specialization, it means the division of labor or the commodities where the country basically trades and gets benefits from it. This also calls for a kind of exchange, and this exchange is widely pronounced across the globe in terms of capital intensive or labor intensive goods. Globalization is one of the basic outcome of economic interdependence as far as the free market or the liberal economy is concerned. Because with the advent of globalization and its multifaceted dimensions, economic interdependence has become more and more robust with the dependence on the imports and also with the export flows that goes for the goods and services. So it is basically predominated by the advanced nations of the world, but gradually the developing and the emerging nations also collaborate with the advanced nations and participate in this affair. So as a result, all businesses which are created across the world basically participate in this mode and make the mutual interdependence to be more strong and more symbiotic, and thereby the role of state and market economy plays an important role. Now we actually move on to what are the driving factors of economic interdependence, and thereby what we can explain for the causes for economic interdependence. Firstly, for any development of any nation over time, we are basically stressing on the term of industrialization. Say for Indian economy, when the growth process started, industrialization has been one of the driving factor to pull out the economy from the vicious traps. And thereby industrialization also opens up the market, attracts the investors, and also raises the demand of the purchasing power in terms of the plethora of more goods and services, and thereby make one of the major drivers of economic interdependence. Secondly, with the growth of the economy over time, economic interconnectedness develops inside the country, because different sectors of the country wants to coordinate with each other, and thereby a networking or a complementarities in the production gets created. That is, investment in the sector A motivates the investment in the sector B, and thereby this networking continues, and thereby the chain reactions operate. So this is also the dependency among the nations or within the nations across various industries, which get open-ended or which adopts outward-oriented policies so that they can also collaborate or they can participate to the rest of the globe. And that is the foundation of the economic interdependence or mutual interdependence. There is an example to cite in this regard where the development of auto industry in America is one example. Since the rubber is not manufactured in America, it's developed, it was dependent on the South Asian countries to provide it with rubber for the automobile tires. So the dependence on the intermediate inputs of the raw materials can be supplied by the other country of the globe, and thereby this demand supply exchange makes the interdependence more strong and robust. So with regard to the causes of economic interdependence, industrialization and the growth process of the economy over time with its dependence on the intermediate inputs across the globe plays an important role. If we look into the other factors or the causes for economic interdependence, we go by the advancements. These advancements are holistic concept, a multidimensional concept. It's not only restricted to economic but also being confined to the economic parameters, but it's spread out over socio-economic factors. For example, the social factors, the economic factors, the political factors, and also the cultural issues. So thereby make the more commodities to come up with close substitutes, market becomes more and more monopolistically competitive, and thereby the need for different kinds or configurations of goods and services comes up. And this makes the collaborative exercise to be more and more motivated and encouraging. With the progress of a country over different phases of development, like from a labor intensive to capital intensive and finally to the innovation based growth, so at different stages of development, a country needs to move from an agrarian base, for example India, to the manufacturing base and then to the service based. So with all these different phases of economic development, the reliance on the other countries becomes more and more important. Because whenever any country or any sector wants to grow, the raw materials needs to be supplied from the other sectors, and thereby this symbiotic relation gets built up. So in order to do that, the reliance becomes more important and thereby the manufactured units come up. So the country produces the final product, but the raw materials can be supplied from across different sectors of the globe, and thereby the dependence becomes an inevitable phenomena. As for the United States, it is said that reliance on other countries for manufactured items such as electronics, clothes, and in certain situations food. So for example, with the IT revolution in India, the most important sector of India is the service sector contributed because India has a large pool of labor and thereby with English speaking professionals. So the cost of employing labor was less, and that made the United States to come up and thereby had a comparative advantage on the Indian demographics. So this brings in how the state in terms of policy making and how the economy in terms of the forces of demand and supply make a coexistence and thereby make the economic or the mutual interdependence to be more and more robust. So this basically looks into what are the effects or the consequences of economic interdependence. So after analyzing the causes, it's very much rational to look into the consequences or the effects of economic interdependence. The first consequence is basically depends on the country's economy and what it has to offer. So basically this deals upon the endowment of a country, whether it's labor intensive or capital intensive, about the labor structure and the skill formation that takes place. All these are inevitable factors which make the country to participate in the world market. For example, India initially had exported the yellow jewellery, but with the advent of the customized jewellery in the international markets, the standardization of the products have to be improved, and that comes care of the interconnectedness. Also, we find out that the developed countries profit more from economic interdependence, and thereby they want to come up a relationship with the smaller country. So some kind of a leader-follower model also comes up as a result of economic interdependence. This is because the labor surplus countries actually produce the cheaper cost and the cheaper products, and the labor costs are more and more efficient. So economic interconnectedness has both the beneficial effects, because in terms of expansion, taking care of the comparative cost across different demographics of the economy, and also some kind of adverse consequences, say in terms of the dominance. And this dominance may be robust if we consider an advanced country taking over a developing or a less developed country. So this makes out that different kind of global power distribution comes in. And this is how class struggles come up, or there is a concept of multipolar or unipolar distributions come up. So economic interactions and new kinds of interdependence are altering global power distribution. The most important effect of economic independence is the use of intelligent networks. Because today, with the advent of artificial intelligence, we can see enormous power can be created across developed nations of the world through communication, through financial markets, through trade, and thereby it follows a network and it follows an algorithm. So with the advent of any kind of sophisticated algorithm, countries' dependence has become more and more faster with more transparency and more accountability. And so the role of the state in terms of different laws, legislations within the market-oriented phenomena or economy becomes more and more prominent. So that is why it is said that this calls for the action of the major stakeholders like state and economy to take over. So after the discussion of these effects, it is important to realize the relevance of economic interdependence when we talk about the cross-border or when we talk about the border relations. So we have seen that the European Union competition has expanded beyond the European Union borders. And this is because of the extraterritoriality which has become prevalent in the United States during the last 4 years. And that has taken up the immigration issues, that has taken up also some of the legislative issues across these countries. As it has been seen in 2018 that the government sanctioned international corporations with ties to Iran, and this makes the energy bill, the financial markets and the global commerce to become more and more expanded across the globe, and that has advanced the use of technological innovations. Also, some kind of dependency also might be weaponized in terms of the panoptical and the choke point effects as pointed out by Farrell and Newman. Their theory said that the dependency is basically an outcome of some kind of armaments, some kind of conflicts and some kind of war or any kind of Cold War relationship among the countries. So this has a political dimension to this economic nature of mutual interdependence. So we go by the concept of international response, because after the discussions on economic interdependence and mutual interdependence across the nations in terms of the concept, in terms of the causes, in terms of the effects and its importance, how the global economy has welcomed this concept and what would have been a better international response to it. And thereby a strategy needs to be designed by the global partners in order to make this kind of concept of phenomena a more wider and a more robust one. And that calls for the need for an international response. So by international response we mean a strategy which is a plan of action aimed at enhancing highway efficiency by restricting traffic, for example, is unlikely to transcend borders. That means any kind of efficiency model that needs to be designed in order to make away a liberal flow and in order to basically make some kind of transactions to be more and more liberal and free, and that is actually being taken up by the borders. However, there is a big weakness in this reasoning because the regulations will virtually always influence other nations in a fully linked world. So if any kind of country has more and more regulations, it is seen that the countries with less regulatory framework will be attracting more MNCs and thereby the dependence will become more stronger there. It has been evident in many of the countries across the globe where the polluting control measures are not very stringent. FDI flows in those countries because the polluting control devices are less effective. And so it has become the dependence or the export destinations more attractive for them. So this is one of the important aspects how the regulations policy needs to be designed. It is seen that the United States adopted this highway regulation. Mexico brought an action before a NAFTA panel where the United States should withdraw this law that interdependence leads to conflict between the numerous systems. Because any kind of regulations which makes the policy to be inward oriented and interdependence is discouraged, this should not be actually permitted because it leads to some kind of class struggle, some kind of global power creations and some kind of conflict. So it becomes more imperative among different opinions that the politicians or the economists raise, that how they can aim towards their own economy likely to have influence on the others. Because this influence might turn into dominance, but actually interdependence does not encourage any kind of dominance either economically, politically, or any kind of creation of superpowers. It basically makes a symbiotic relation where the both countries benefit from their mutual interests. So the need for an international response also lies in the foundation of the domestic policies. So in most of the cases, the domestic policies creates problems or they create conflicts in terms of making the international partners or making the MOU partners to come up. So another way that pure domestic policies might be problematic is by the lens of a beggar thy neighbor argument. This is because it is seen that the advanced nations have the tendency to take over the less developed nations because of their huge population, very low labor cost, and thereby they can grasp or they can start their business from the greenfield investment models. So by greenfield investment models we mean any kind of mode of foreign direct investment being done where the property or the proprietorship has to be started from the scratch, and that is how the dominance takes over. So the actions which assist domestic industry only to the extent that they damage international companies. So all the international companies are getting affected because of this. So this brings in some kind of a scarcity, and this scarcity may be apparent, may be artificial. So this is one of the most important concern which can arise out of mutual interdependence. Because whenever we consider a country which is having a shortage may be apparent in terms of the scarcity of the world goods, and thereby the prices will be rising. So it might also happen with an optimal tariff which allows nations to alter their trade conditions, because it is seen that in most of the cases this artificial shortage appears where the domestic economy gets worse off and most of the items are getting exported to the other nations. So this can be one of the extreme drawback of too much dependence or too much mutual interdependence across the nations. So global economies also influence foreign enterprises' access to the market, but they are not intended to harm their countries. Because this is one of the ideology behind this outward orientation, that the domestic and the foreign investments should complement each other. So they should crowd in. It's not that the domestic investment will be absolutely crowded out by the foreign investors. So reducing states' authority to govern in these areas is incorrect, but worldwide negotiations are required through the next generation trade agreements. So it is emphasized in most of the cases that the state power or the state autonomy can be minimized within a market-oriented economy. But more importantly, worldwide treaties, worldwide negotiations needs to be more and more emphasized. And that will make the international response to be more robust or international response to be more effective. After the discussions on the need for an international response, the most important concern that arises is a kind of a trade-off between economic interdependence and conflict. So the term conflict has come up from various schools of thoughts. So in the recent years, the historic argument about the precise link between the economic interdependence and the war has heated up, with two schools of thought dominating the debate. One school of thought is actually of the optimistic view that economic interdependence basically fosters or encourages excellent potential ties, political ties, economic ties, and prevents conflict. So it can be seen as a conflict reducing mechanism through any kind of interdependence. But on the opposite side, another kind of school of thought opines that no, conflict is being encouraged because of this. So when we go for the optimistic view, it is said in form of the liberal economies where the market orientation is more important, where the two countries are going for a kind of a free trade, economic links are being encouraged, and thereby any sort of conflict can be mitigated. However, it is seen that some kind of negative links can also come up. So economic interdependence may help to guarantee that countries in a commercial relationship better understand each other and less prone to resort to violence due to uncertainty. So by any kind of commercial relationship we mean any kind of foreign direct investment or any affiliate being set up in the nation. Because with this type of investments the sunk cost is high, where the exit is difficult, and thereby the government and the affiliate always wants to develop or wants to encourage to go in a consistent relationship. So economic interconnectedness can mitigate the uncertainty and increase the likelihood of agreement short of an armed confrontation, which means that any kind of agreement or treaty being signed which has a legal view or which has a legal dimension. So this has also been given an example in terms of borders or across borders, where cross-border economic connection may promote democracy or accelerate economic progress. It can even foster interstate hatred, competition, and eventually it can come to actually any kind of violence. So different types of economic interconnectedness can foster, but actually conflict may be a temporary phenomena, but over the long run it can mitigate. So this by we come into some of the examples related to the policies that can be designed for international response. First and foremost important is the democratic investment climate or the democratic preview. It is said that the populism is growing in the democratic world. So it has been said by the former US president and the Brazilian president that they have career out of criticizing the global system. Populists are of the view that common good, rule-based decision making and expert involvement, these are basically creating the conflicts. And so the obstruction of a World Trade Organization appellate body reflected this resistance. Because any kind of such kind of move or policy making will be encouraging conflicts in the long run. So the World Trade Organization WTO's design and the concept of consensus created the most complicated discussions as proven by the Doha round. So it has been seen that some kind of bilateral policies, some kind of trade fragmentation, even in terms of product diversification, even in terms of market fragmentation, the World Trade Organization is unable to deliver any kind of convergence. So any kind of convergence in terms of policies, in terms of opinions is very difficult to reach out whenever too much of interconnectedness is taken up. So that is basically how the international collaboration are facing difficulties due to the state of the international economy. And that is what has been said out of these entire discussions is a creation of a multipolar world. Globalization has created the world to be more uncertain in terms of rising inequalities, and it has become more and more polarized. But with the growth of the multipolar world, the agreement is elusive in emerging with the China's rise. And this degree of global interconnection exceeds the WTO mission, because WTO mission was to ensure convergence, but this has not been taken up. It has been seen with the advent of the global supply chain, with the advent of the retail revolution, and with the advent of the foreign direct investments in the supply chain management, it has become one of the most interdependence for which WTO is unprepared. Because these are the modern developments in an innovation stage world or in an innovation driven growth world where global value chains, foreign direct investments, money values, international banking has become one of the major proponents. So this calls for a multilateral solution, but it has not yet been approved. So giving few some of the agreements, we can say that the trade externalities is largely overlooked. Because trade calls for exchange, but the after effects of this trade or any kind of benefits that is created by the trade mechanism might be taken up by the state as a policy decision, but it has not been looked into that focus. So new issues like data privacy, competition legislations are coming up in the future. So as it has been seen with the flow of the artificial intelligence models, the cyber security is a very important issue when we go for mutual interdependence. So data privacy is one of the legislative issues that needs to be taken up from the state's orientation. Thereby comes the concept of global competition. Because this global competition, technological advancements and mutual interdependence are interlinked topics, because there is a nexus between these three important terms, and which goes by Roderick that policies should never fall into any kind of these categories, and when the policies fall in these categories, they become a more complicated framework. Because the policies may address the global collaboration but may not address the interest of the nations in that. might be there will be creation of monopoly or some kind of dominance by the emerging nations. So world corporations have a significant impact on the domestic policies so that the interest of the domestic investors can be taken care of and the paradigm of the international accords comes up. So that is how the interest of the foreign investors can come up under the sheer presence of investor-state dispute settlement system, and that calls for an institutional framework, that calls for a political union or any kind of legislative body where this conflict can be mitigated. This is also very much dealing with the trade policy that these countries try to adopt or are actually encouraged to adopt. That's none other than the free trade. Because by this free trade, they can basically go for the overseas competitors. They can impose quantitative limits at the border that will surely benefit domestic enterprises while harming the international community. Because any kind of restrictive trade imposes tariff and quota, free trade is against of this. And every government behave in the best interest of the economy, so more global trade governance is required. Global trade governance means monitoring on the supervisory functions, monitoring on the accountability, the transparency, and also on the voice and also on the political stability of the nation. So free trade is very much favorable for a globalized economy subject to a good governance or a more global trade governance. And that is how the effects of globalization can be nurtured or can be actually moderated, which makes making it difficult for big countries to get innovative technologies without participating in global supply networks. This is one of the globalization of the manufacturing, which can have a calming effect on the major powers. Because most of the superpowers across the nations have the tendency to grasp over the remaining part of the world. So that can be mitigated to a certain extent if the globalized policies becomes more and more stringent and more complicated in terms of imposing restrictions on the big countries, either through military technologies or any kind of supply networks. Lowering the incentives for conquering economically advanced countries' land. This is because some of the fiscal incentives are provided to the MNCs when they come up in terms of tax concessions, in terms of infrastructural benefits. So that needs to be given less so that the tendency of grasping over the rest of the world can be mitigated. And facilitating regional integration. This is because the regions or the blocks across the globe needs to be integrated in their inter-trade and they can participate with the world. That means the intra-trade and the inter-trade must be co-joined in terms of the mutual interdependence. So as we sum up on this particular discussions of mutual interdependence, we get into the concept which is basically the value of the financial transactions being made. This calls for the response of a very proven and a very stringent international response. Global power distribution needs to be shaped up by a proper designing of policies between different economic interactions. And the countries must have the influence in terms of their development potentials through various sectors, either communication, financial markets, trade, and also through an intelligent network of algorithms through artificial intelligence models. Then only the cohesiveness between the state and the economy can be understated with an optimistic view on mutual interdependence between state and economy.